In 480 BCE, 300 Spartans marched toward a narrow pass called Thermopylae. They were not the largest army in Greece. They were not the richest people in Greece. They did not build the greatest fleet, the tallest temples, or the most brilliant democracy. But when the Persian Empire came west, when cities argued, hesitated, and calculated, one name carried a different weight: Sparta. A city where boys were taken from home and trained to endure pain. A city where men ate together, slept under discipline, and lived for the shield line. A city where every citizen was expected to be a soldier before anything else. But Sparta was not born this way. It was made. And it was made by fear. Long before Leonidas stood at Thermopylae, long before the red cloaks and bronze shields became a symbol of Greek resistance, Sparta faced a darker problem.
It had conquered a land richer than its own. It had reduced an entire people to forced labor. And from that moment on, the Spartans lived with one terrifying question: what happens if the people beneath them rise? The answer shaped everything: the army, the laws, the children, the kings, the alliances, and the entire Spartan way of life. This is the story of how Sparta became a state built for war. To understand Sparta, we have to begin before it became legendary. In the early Archaic period, around the 8th century BCE, Sparta was one power among many in the Peloponnese. It stood in Laconia, in the southern Greek world, surrounded by mountains, rival communities, and hostile neighbors. It was not yet the clear master of Greece. It was not yet the city other states feared on land. It was a kingdom trying to survive and expand. Unlike Athens, Sparta would not become famous for open debate, theater, philosophy, or naval empire. Its path was different from the beginning. It grew out of land, war, hierarchy, and control. And the first great turning point was Messenia.
West of Sparta, beyond Mount Taygetus, lay a fertile region with rich fields and a population that was not simply waiting to be ruled. Messenia had its own communities, its own identity, and its own resistance. For Sparta, Messenia was a prize that could transform everything. Laconia alone could support a strong kingdom. Messenia could support a military power. According to later Greek tradition, the Spartans fought a long war in the 8th century BCE to conquer it. The details are difficult because the sources are late and the memory of the wars became part of Spartan legend, but the outcome is clear. Sparta took control of Messenia, and then it made the defeated Messenians into helots. The helots were not normal household slaves in the simple sense. They were an unfree agricultural population tied to the land. They worked the fields and delivered produce to Spartan masters. Their labor fed the Spartan citizen class. This was the secret beneath the Spartan miracle. Spartan citizens could train for war because other people worked for them. They could spend their lives in military discipline because helots produced the food. They could become full-time warriors because Messenia had been conquered. But the system contained a danger that never disappeared. The helots were many. The full numbers are debated, but the imbalance between a small citizen class and a much larger subject population shaped Spartan thinking for centuries. Every farm carried tension. Every campaign created risk. If too many Spartans marched away, what would happen behind them? If the helots rose together, could Sparta survive? This fear was not imaginary. Later tradition remembers a second great Messenian struggle, probably in the 7th century BCE, when resistance shook Spartan control. The poetry associated with Tyrtaeus, a Spartan war poet, preserves the atmosphere of a society fighting to hold what it had taken. Whether every later detail is exact or not, the meaning is unmistakable. Sparta learned that conquest did not end the war. It changed the war into a permanent condition. From then on, Sparta's internal problem and military system were connected. The Spartans were not simply training to defeat foreign enemies, they were training to control the land they had already conquered. This is why Sparta became different. In many Greek cities, citizens were farmers, craftsmen, traders, politicians, and soldiers when war required it. In Sparta, the full citizen was pushed toward one identity above all others: warrior. The city could not afford a soft citizen class. It could not afford disorder among those who ruled. It could not afford private luxury to weaken public discipline. So Sparta built a society that treated the citizen body like an army, even when there was no battle. Later Spartans connected their laws to Lycurgus, the legendary lawgiver. Modern historians cannot prove the exact truth behind that figure. He may have been real, partly historical, or a symbol for reforms that developed over time. But the system connected to his name tells us what Sparta wanted to believe about itself: that its order was ancient, that its discipline was sacred,
that its way of life had been designed to make weak men impossible. Spartan society was divided sharply. At the top were the Spartiates, the full citizens. These were the men who belonged to the political and military core of the state. Around them were the perioikoi, free non-citizen communities under Spartan dominance. They lived in the surrounding regions, farmed, traded, crafted, and served in war. They were not helots, but they were not equal Spartans either. Below them were the helots, the conquered laborers whose work sustained everything. This structure made Sparta powerful. It also made Sparta trapped. The Spartiate could not live like a private man. From childhood, he belonged to the state. The Agoge was the heart of that system. A Spartan boy was taken from his household at around the 7th year of life and placed into public training. From that point, his life was shaped by endurance, obedience, competition, hunger, shame, and discipline. He learned to move with others, to suffer without complaint, to speak little, to obey quickly, to endure pain. The goal was not to create a poet, merchant, or philosopher. The goal was to create a man who would not break in the phalanx. Sparta understood something brutal about hoplite warfare. The shield line survives only if men stay where they are. One man running is not only one man lost. He opens the line. He exposes the man beside him. He turns fear into collapse. So, the Spartan state attacked fear before battle ever began. It trained boys to fear shame more than danger, to fear failure more than wounds, to fear dishonor more than death. By the time a Spartan stood in the line with a shield on his arm, the battle had already been fought years inside him. The aggregate did not end by simply making boys tough. It taught identity. A Spartiate was not meant to see himself separate from the group. His body, courage, hunger, pride, and silence all belonged to Sparta. When he became a man, he joined a common mess, the Sicilian. These dining groups were more than meals. They were brotherhoods of citizens and soldiers. To remain a full member of the citizen body, a man had to contribute his share of food, drawn from the land worked by helots. Even citizenship carried pressure. A Spartiate who could not maintain his contribution could lose status. This made the system harsh even for those at the top. Sparta gave its citizens honor, but demanded their entire lives in return. Its women also lived differently from many other Greek women. Spartan girls were expected to be physically strong and visible in public ways that shocked other Greeks. The reason was not modern equality, it was Spartan logic. Strong women were expected to produce strong children. The family existed inside the needs of the state. Everything pointed back to the same purpose: survival through strength. But an army state also needed political control. Sparta's government was unusual. It had 2 kings drawn from 2 royal houses. This dual kingship prevented one family from easily turning the state into a personal monarchy. The kings had religious roles, prestige, and military command, but they were not free to rule without limits.
Beside them stood the Gerousia, the Council of Elders. It included the kings and older men from the citizen elite. The Gerousia prepared important matters and carried enormous authority in the state. There was also an assembly of Spartan citizens, which could approve or reject proposals. And then there were the ephors. 5 ephors were chosen each year. Over time, they became one of the most powerful institutions in Sparta. They could supervise public life, deal with foreign policy, discipline citizens, and even hold kings accountable. This system was not democracy like Athens. It was not monarchy like Persia. It was a hard balance of kings, elders, citizens, and magistrates designed to keep Sparta stable. Stability mattered because instability was dangerous. A reckless king could lead Sparta into disaster. A divided citizen body could invite revolt. A weak government could lose control of the helots. Sparta's politics were built not for speed or creativity, but for endurance. The same fear that shaped the Agoge shaped the constitution. Control the kings. Control the citizens. Control the helots. Control the allies. Control yourself. But Sparta could not survive alone inside Laconia and Messenia. It needed a wider system around it. That led to the formation of what would later be called the Peloponnesian League. Sparta did not simply conquer every city in the Peloponnese and turn its people into helots. That path had already created a permanent crisis in Messenia. More direct conquest could create more enemies inside the system. Instead, Sparta built influence through alliances. Cities such as Tegea, Corinth, Elis, and others became part of a network in which Sparta held leadership, especially in war. The exact development took time, especially in the 6th century BCE, but the result was clear. Sparta became the central land power of the Peloponnese. This was not an empire like Persia. It was not a democracy-led naval league like Athens would later build. It was a military alliance shaped by Spartan prestige, pressure, diplomacy, and fear. Allied cities kept local identities, but they understood who led on land. For Sparta, this league solved several problems. It gave Sparta more soldiers in major wars. It isolated enemies. It reduced the chance that rivals could support a helot revolt. It allowed Sparta to dominate the Peloponnese without occupying every city directly. And it made Sparta look larger than its citizen numbers. This matters because the famous Spartan warrior was only one piece of the machine. Sparta's real power came from the whole structure. Helot labor fed the citizens. The Agoge trained the citizens. The mess system bound them together. The political system restrained internal conflict. The alliance network extended Spartan power beyond its borders. Every part supported the others, and every part was connected to fear. That is the great truth behind Sparta. Its courage was real. Its discipline was real. Its battlefield reputation was real, but it was not created in a vacuum. It grew from a society that had conquered, enslaved, and then reorganized itself around the need to remain dominant. Sparta became an army state because it had to keep winning, not only against outsiders, against the consequences of its own conquest. By the 6th century BCE, this system had made Sparta famous. Other Greeks looked at it with a mixture of admiration and horror. They admired the discipline. They admired the courage. They admired the way Spartan hoplites seemed to move as one body. But they also saw the harshness, the silence, the lack of luxury, the treatment of the helots, the refusal to live like other cities. Sparta became a mirror in which Greeks saw both an ideal and a warning. It showed what discipline could create. It also showed what discipline could cost. On the battlefield, Spartan hoplites became the symbol of order. Their strength was not wild aggression, it was steadiness. They advanced behind shields, they held formation, they trusted the man beside them. They were trained to make fear private and obedience public.
That reputation spread across Greece. When Sparta spoke, cities listened. When Sparta marched, enemies calculated carefully. By 480 BCE, that reputation would be tested by something greater than any Peloponnesian rival. Far to the east stood the Persian Empire, vast, wealthy, imperial. It had already reached into Greek affairs before. Now Xerxes was preparing a massive invasion of Greece. This was not another local war. This was the greatest empire in the known world, moving toward a divided Greek world of rival city-states. Athens had ships, other cities had walls, money, and arguments. But on land, one name mattered most: Sparta. The city built by conquest, hardened by fear, organized by law.
Trained from childhood to the shield line. When the Persians approached, the Greeks did not look for the most beautiful city, the richest city, or the loudest democracy to stand in the mountain pass. They looked to the city that had spent generations turning itself into a weapon. And the man who would carry that weapon north was Leonidas, a Spartan king. One of two kings in a system older than him, a product of a spate that had taken Messenia, ruled Helots, trained citizens in the Agoge, led allies across the Peloponnese, and built its entire identity around endurance. When Leonidas chose 300 men to march toward Thermopylae, he was not creating the Spartan legend from nothing. He was carrying centuries of Spartan history into one narrow pass. The conquest of Messenia had given Sparta land. The helot system had given it time to train.
The fear of revolt had forced it to remain hard. The Agoge had shaped boys into soldiers. The kings, Jerusia, ephors, and assembly had kept the state disciplined. The Peloponnesian League had made Sparta the strongest land power in Greece. All of it had been building toward a question that would define the next chapter. Could a small Greek force stand against the empire of Persia? Could discipline hold where numbers should decide? Could Sparta's entire way of life survive its first meeting with the largest power on earth? In 480 BCE at Thermopylae, Leonidas and his 300 would give their answer, not in speeches, not in treaties, but in the shield line.